I don't think I'll ever tire of any of this music. I think that's precisely how it's going to go. Robert John Collins, thou art a genius. If you enjoy any of the music to the recent videos that you've been hearing, check out his link in the description below. The man is a musical wizard, a savant of treble clefs. I don't quite know where I was going with that with that analogy. But welcome back to another episode, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're keeping well. What is this on my arm? What is that? Tiny little feather. Hope you're all keeping well and wonderful. Looking forward to Christmas and the many games of Guess the Christmas Present that you will all play, right? Because you are practicing every day, right? So it has been a long while since we've done one of these particular episodes when it is to do with film and TV rather than anything more real-world reflective. So I thought we'd have a bit of fun and break open some of the communication that goes on. Well, no, actually, that's a total lie. We did the Let's Do Deductions game a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, nice to open an episode off with just a flagrant lie. But if this is your first time to the channel, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ben Cardall, and I am the author of the best-selling book, Mnemonic, which details the real-world methods for the skill set of Sherlock Holmes, how to develop them, how to train them, and how to utilize them in all walks of life. And I now spend my days teaching people from all over the world in every manner of job and acronym that you can think of. They do this for the protection of themselves and those around them. So if that sounds like anything that you'd be interested in hearing more about, then by all means click on the subscription button below. If you haven't already, which a great many of you choose not to, fair enough. But if you haven't and this is your first video that you're watching, please be advised that the only thing that we take seriously here is the work. That's it. Not even ourselves do we take seriously. Life's too short for any of that nonsense. So, serious face. With that in mind, today we're having a look at the opening from Elementary. I have felt so much inspiration myself from this particular opening, mostly because it was the earliest reference to the looking at and memorizing and observing of multiple screens at the same time, which is when I tried to do that myself, which was tons of fun. Insert little clip here. Right. So the idea being, how do you train for reality when you're at home? You bring reality to you. It's not easy, but with the right mindset training, can be done. Can be done. Sucked. Can you hear my unruly neighbours? There you go. So if you want to watch the rest of that, click on, I don't know where it will be. It will be around in one of these corners somewhere. Go watch that. Or wait till this is done and then go and watch that. But yeah, we're going to have a look at some of the comments, the insights, and the information that is communicated in this opening scene. So this was a video put on here from Teresa Gonzalez. So I'll pop the link in the description if you want to go down and give her a sub as well. I've already skipped it on a bit, just because the opening is just Joan, and whereas that is fun, we're getting to the specifics of why we're here. We're not offering any kind of critique on the Watson character. So let's do this with that in mind. Let me just check to see if my microphone's not muted though. And we're back. So here we go with the opening from Elementary. So Joan, her marvellous beret, and the prostitute has just left.
Hello?
Is it me you're looking for? I always like this kind of situation, how it's addressed in film and TV and stories to a certain degree. because for Sherlock this is a normal practice. This is a normal degree of information that he can bear the cognitive load of. I just as a side note, I would encourage you to read more on cognitive load theory. It's just as relevant towards our successes in the world of people reading and deduction and all of this kind of stuff as it is to understanding the veracity of lie detection, which is a rabbit hole that many tumble down without the proper guidance, because there's just a lot of bullshit around the topic. So I always like this approach, because before she really understands why and begins doing it herself as part of the series, it's shot as this kind of, wow, this is weird, this is too much, what are you doing, this is so quirky and weird. And then, much like all of Sherlock's deductions, you have that one connecting line explained, and then you get the human side of the characters going, oh, well, that makes sense.
Excuse me, Mr.
Now, in theory, in those situations, unless he is specifically within the confines of a routine, not like a performance routine, but the confines of a routine in line with his neurodivergence that is alluded to in the rest of the show, then the adding on of one more conversational stream shouldn't be a problem. But for my two pennies, as you'll see what this leads to in a second, this is in line with that most famous of Sherlock quotes, "I never can quite resist a touch of the dramatic." He is a performer at heart.
My name is Joan Watson. I've been hired by your father to be your sober companion. He told me he was going to email you about me. I'm here to make the transition from your rehab experience to the routine of your everyday life as smooth as possible. So I will be living with you for the next 6 weeks, which means I'll be available to you 24/7.
Do you believe in love at first sight?
And then straight in with the never resisting a touch of the dramatic, because to merely recite is to prove that he has the skill. But where's the fun in that, right? Where's the fun in that? It's like Moriarty in BBC Sherlock says, you got to admit that's sexier, right? So a lot of people get overloaded between the realms of multiple streams of information, and whereas we as humans are wildly incapable of doing multiple things at the same time, what we can do is chop back and forth and connect dots in between. Right? So one of the practices that I used to go through with students in order to get them to understand this connective endeavour. And to really do this, you've got to look at what specifically deduction, induction and abduction is relevant to the reasoning path that you would take in this scenario. For things like the cocktail effect to exist, cogs have to be continually turning for us to be able to process all of this information anyway. If you've ever been out in the kitchen whilst your favourite film was on, making a drink, or doing whatever you're doing in the kitchen, and then had to yell in, "Oh, pause, I like this bit," it's because you're doing other things but you're still listening, so you're still able to process, right? It's just at different times. So the opening kind of training level that I would give to people is I would play them like a short TED talk, 5-6 minutes or something like this, or some kind of interview, something where there is a conversation happening back and forth, where there is content to be read, and then I would read or recite either some poem or short story or soliloquy or something from somewhere. What we can do with our mnemonic capabilities, right? We all have, I say we all, I'm assuming, and it might be a wrong assumption, but I can only assume at this stage because I can't see any of you. I'm assuming that we are all at least familiar with memory methods. So if you take, for example, the adding on of details to a journey or a method of loci or a memory palace or whatever it is that you're calling it. It's done in order. Right? It's done in order. But what you get from these multiple things at the same time is there might be a descriptive term or an insight towards a type of content or a buzzword or something that pops out. The point is to not kind of try and make the separation between it belongs to this and it belongs to this, but to merely, if I've heard this, stick it on, heard this, stick it on, heard this, stick it on, because then after the fact you can start to analyze its origin in terms of where the two pieces of content coalesce and where they don't. Right? It's that nature of when you observe where your keys are and you recall the image. You're not just recalling your keys in the ether. You're recalling your keys, the key peg, the colour of the wall behind it, and everything else. So when you're going back over this information and you connect it to the buzzword, you might link it to a person or a part of the screen, or whether it was audio or something like this, and you can start to examine and separate these two differences and break down those two pieces. So you might get a bunch of buzzwords from the poem or short story, whether you've heard it or not, and get a bunch of buzzwords and movements and content descriptors from whatever you're watching, and be able to use either your deductive and inductive or your abductive skills relative to the reasoning patterns, and be able to explore this concept one way or the other, right? So I would normally get them to break down the visual concept of what they've seen, what they've been witnessing, and then go through, see if they were right or wrong, apply this to a mimicked real-life scenario. But then with the poem and whatnot, if they don't know it, they can use Google to function as a memory palace, punch in these buzzwords or these descriptive properties or of something that they heard me recite, and then figure out what it is. To bear the weight of these two streams at the same time is to go back and forth and take as much information with you and examine it. It's hard to do, very hard to do, especially when you get up to 3, 4, 5, 6 and beyond. That's why we are looking to sharpen our focus, so that when we take in one stream, we take in a shitload, so that we can move back over here and take in lots, and then move between the two as and when we need to do it.
I know what you're thinking. The world is a cynical place, and I must be a cynical man, thinking a woman like you would fall for a line like that. The thing is,
I'm all for a tattooed Sherlock. All for it.
His name is this. I have never loved anyone as I do you right now. In this moment.
Do you believe in love at first sight? I know what you're thinking. The world is a cynical place, and I must be a cynical man thinking a woman like you would fall for one.
Take advantage of those moments on a day-to-day. They're a fine opportunity for you to sharpen your ability to flash memorize things with accuracy with regard to what you've seen versus what you think you've seen or what you think it might be. You start to be able to describe differences between these aspects. So the more you can be clear in here about what you have seen, and then the more clarity you can speak with what might have a muddier image because you didn't see it, or you don't recognize it, or you don't know what it is. You can, in either scenario, leave with a practicing accuracy to these moments. That's not to say that you have to be nosy or snooping around everything, but if these opportunities present themselves, take it in. I can't tell you the amount of times I've been out working, whether that be performing or working, and somebody's opened their wallet in front of me, and then I've been able to see who they bank with, how long they've had their driving license, how old they are, family, in case any photos are in the front little photo compartment bit, if they've got a bunch of cards, whether they carry cash, whether they don't, any train, rail, metro, subway, these kinds of things, membership cards, all possible from the mere opening of a wallet. It just depends on how competent you are with being able to take a lot of information very quickly away.
Like that thing is, it is malign. So please, hear me when I say this. I have never loved anyone as I do you right now, in this moment.
Spot on. Sherlock Holmes. Please don't get comfortable. We won't be here long.
And it's those little looks that I like. Please don't get comfortable, as he's just clearly working away, clearly observing.
Mr. Holmes, did your father tell you about me or not?
He emailed, said to expect some sort of addict sitter.
Then he explained his conditions with respect to your sobriety.
If you mean his threat to evict me from this, the shoddiest and the least renovated of the 5, count them, 5 properties he owns in New York, then yeah, he made his conditions quite clear. I use, I wind up on the street. I refuse your quote-unquote help, I wind up on the street. It's my understanding that most sober companions are recovering addicts themselves, but you've never had a problem with drugs or alcohol.
Now, there are more than enough aspects to kind of discuss in terms of observing those that have had or have a problem with drugs or alcohol. Right? It's a broad concept to really put down into this little bubble, right? But suffice it to say, think of what we know about the guy at this stage. He has a wide bank of knowledge in terms of drugs and their effects, both psychological, medical, anatomical, and the type of information that connects to. Especially from being an addict himself, he will have an immersive understanding of the kind of characters that brings with it. So when you look at places like this information that I'm going to give to you now, it's from the AmericanAddictionCenters.org. This can be anything from difficulties at school, poor work performance, changes in physical appearance, altered behavior, drastic changes in relationships, fluctuating energy levels, but to the point where it's massively noticeable, spending more money to the excess, issues with the management of finances, changes in appetite, bloodshot eyes, poor skin tone, and defensiveness is always a basic one when the discussion of substances come into the fore. Now, if he's entered into this relationship knowing that sober companions are likely to be ex-users, ex-addicts themselves, then this type of information will be at the forefront. None of that connects to Joan in this moment. It's once you have an understanding of somebody's basic personality makeup, it is a fairly rudimentary aspect to reason out their likely competence with school and work and the different types of variables that can come out of how that would affect one's calendar, right? Certainly in terms of clothing at that moment, whether it's ascertained to be expensive or not, or well kept or not, we can understand to a degree how somebody chooses to spend their money, right? Even down to running a car and the car parking ticket, which they'll get to in a few moments. Looking at her health, visibly, skin tone, teeth are a great sign when it comes to popular drugs and alcohol. I say popular not because it's like the cool kids in that kind of regime, but because of the number of people that do them, because of their availability. And let's not forget that this is a TV show. Right? So parts of these deductions will be sensationalized, whereas if we were to have this conversation with somebody like Joan in real life, presenting in this same way, if we were the addict, we might have sort of an 80% confidence in our reasoned out properties of this person never having a problem with drugs or alcohol. Based upon that, we can ask further questions, we can poke around further topics, we can look for further connections, we can look for situations where more of the skin is revealed when she, for example, if she were to take a coat off, you might get more of the arms or whatnot. Discussion of drugs for the defensiveness, this kind of thing, to really push that 80% higher and higher and higher. Very rarely, if ever, will you be afforded the opportunity to go, this is this, from observation to activation it would require, as my buddy Jim would say, the validation, dismissal, or clarification of information. Let's keep it going.
Your father told you.
Of course he didn't.
But you care to explain why you broke out of your rehab facility the same day you were being released?
Bored.
You were bored.
No, I am bored right now. Happens often. You'll get used to it. Regarding our mutual friends at Hemdale...
That's one of the key elements in my understanding of neurodivergence. Because your brain is all over the place. It takes a lot to keep you active, and there can be the slightest element that can shift from something engaging to push you into the most transcendent boredom.
I'd say they should be thanking me for exposing the flaws in their rubbish security system, wouldn't you? Excellent.
Love that.
Someone leaving just as I got here. Did she get you high?
To about 6 feet. I actually find sex repellent. All those fluids and odd sounds, but my brain and my body require it to function at optimum levels, so I feed them as needed.
Feeding the aspects as needed. This is why, and this is for my 2 pennies, because I'm such a fan of Stoicism, particularly when it comes to the modern day interpretations of Holmes, and there have been many. It's certainly relevant in the more original ones, but taking account of that which matters versus that which doesn't. You know, the shirt smells okay, cool, I'm going to put it on. Right, I'm not really a big fan of sex, but the prostitute that I hired allows me to feed my brain in the way that it's needed so I can do the work that I enjoy. Cool, let's do it. It facilitates that requirement, which might seem quite otherworldly, unfathomable to a certain degree for the average everyday person, but not to somebody who only focuses on that which matters to their life in the moment, right? It stops you from being laden with the trivial. Oh, have you heard what's going on Twitter? I don't care. Right? Your t-shirt doesn't smell? Well, it's fine. It covers all of my body that I need it to. Brilliant. Right? It's summed up in that classic of analogies from the realms of Stoicism, in that there are 2 types of problems in the world: things you can solve and things you can't. So why would you worry about either? Right? Or I think it was actually mentioned in a Darren Brown show. I could be wrong. But it's that quote of, you worry less about what people think of you when you realise how often they seldom do. Once you remove all of that entanglement from the way that you see the world, it becomes easier to see information as it is, so he can deal with it, so he can deduce from it, so he can induce from it and abduce from it as it's presented, without all of the kind of projections of emotional insight from those scenarios.
You're a doctor, you understand.
I'm not a doctor.
Were a doctor. Surgeon, judging by your hands.
That's one of those things that, for me, is when I say for me, it will be in my experience, not like it's my. Well, I suppose it is my opinion. Anyway, I'm beating around the bush. That's a sensationalized observation, and as you'll know from the rest of the story, how he got to that kind of information. So in case you haven't seen it, I ain't going to spoil it. But when it comes to these kinds of outlandish deductions, like people push forward the holy grail of being able to look at somebody and know what they do for a living, whereas that is possible, it's not always from one observation to an answer in those situations, or it's a very obvious observation to an answer. If you saw somebody walking down the street with the golden arches on what appeared to be a polo shirt, you would know they work for McDonald's. Right? We kind of have the propensity to take these kinds of things for granted, and then sensationalize these properties as we see them and as we read about them, to stop us chasing the real world applications of this kind of method. So a surgeon's hands, for point of fact, when you look at the way surgeon interviews happen, especially when it comes to patient care, delicate, precise, clean, manicured, all requirements of a surgeon's hands. Because yes, they have to operate the tools, but you also have to be able to put somebody at ease with a touch if they're lying on their table, and if it's the right setting for this. You know, you also have to be able to manipulate body parts to allow access to those areas. If you're doing a surgery under the arm or in the eyes, or you know, these kinds of things, there is a degree of manipulation that has to go into those angles. I couldn't do it because my left hand shakes, right? So that sounds obvious to say, which is why in the practice of medicine, the testing for substances, let's call them, is so precise. But when you look at the specific requirements outside of that to become a surgeon, that's when you can start to have the kind of direct insight towards the job. Right, so it won't be just from the hands. You need to expand these concepts further, because for these elements to be just from the hands, you could say the same thing. You could say the same thing of a harp player, harpist. You could say the same thing of somebody who makes tapestries, plays the guitar. Right, you could. Not all tapestries, not all guitars, but this is what I mean when it comes from this one singular area. When you expand it out further and look at what the requirements are to be a surgeon, there would be obviously specialist knowledge that goes to the specific type of operations that you would perform, whether that be on the brain, the body, the heart. These are all big areas that require big banks of specialist knowledge. Good communication skills, obviously, but outward of that, you've got leadership skills. It could be dependent upon where you are in the surgical team. You maybe have to lead the surgery and be aware of all of this information that's going on around you. You need to be dexterous, competent, capable, physical. When it comes to performing the skills, the attributes that are required of any particular surgery. Adaptable, fluid, calm, in here, to be able to change to different environments, right? Not get used to the way that one operating room functions, right? To get used to how operating rooms function as a whole. To inspire confidence comes from your leadership, right? If you're going to have a discussion with somebody about the surgery that they are about to face, you need to project all of this specialist knowledge forward in an amiable manner. And then moreover from that, take into account the kind of strength and stability from your emotional side that you will need to bring forth to that job. The harsh reality of that is people die on the table. Things go wrong. It's a horrible thing to face, which is why only really psychologically strong and capable and wonderful humans work within the NHS and in the medical settings around the world. To have all of these qualities, then start to look at the hands, things become a bit clearer. Because they'll be more precise, more clean, more direct, more gentle and strong than a nurse's hands or a porter's hands. And you see how this starts to open up from there. So in terms of looking at something, surgeon's hands, strike that from the record, Your Honour. It's close to an impossibility, unless you work in the medical profession and you have a much more immersive understanding of these things on a day-to-day basis than me or the average Joe would have.
Is your car parked nearby?
Yes, it's just outside. How did you know I had a car?
Parking ticket. Fell out of your purse when you dropped it. Can't have one without the other, can you? We're late. We need to get going.
Late for what?
Actually, scratch the car. Manhattan Bridge is down to a single lane. We'll take the tube instead. Look at this place. Yuck. Can't wait for you to tidy it.
Oh, you gotta love him. Sherlock. Oh wow, Johnny Lee Miller if you want. He was a really good Holmes. Yeah. So there you go, guys. Lots to think about. Hopefully, things to take into and take account of with your training. If you enjoyed that, then please hit the subscription button below. It is free. It's free, and you get to make me very happy as a result. So yeah, with that in mind, we'll see you very soon for a podcast episode, and until that time, enjoy yourselves. Bye.